Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to A Day in the Life, where I catch up with people on work, life, and anything else. Today's guest is Matthew Compton. And I met Matt when we both lived in Atlanta through his wife, Anique. Anique and I were getting our masters from Georgia Tech, and Matt had already graduated, so I was super jealous that he was already done. But he's had a very successful career as a software developer, working at different companies and gaining a lot of experience. But now he's been working as an engineering manager. So let's catch up with Matt. Welcome.
Hey, welcome. Thanks. Happy to be on.
Great. Yeah. So maybe just tell me a little bit more about your career journey. What made you want to study computer science and how'd you get into software development?
Yeah, I think I first started for me because I was just interested in video games. I thought it'd be fun to make video games, and when I was a teen, I'd like to mod them and just play with little browser games and extensions, and give myself more points and whatnot. It was fun, and so that kind of got me on the track of wanting to study computers more. Along with my dad being a programmer himself, so he definitely could help provide guidance there as well. And so I was like, all right, let's go to Georgia Tech, learn computer science, maybe make some video games. As I actually get into CS and start studying, I realized that the gaming industry is pretty brutal, and maybe isn't the right fit for me. But I got really into mobile apps instead, and so I started building my own mobile apps, Android apps specifically, for like Magic the Gathering and Yu-Gi-Oh! And just little games that my friends and I would play. And so I'd make apps to help us play them and keep track of the score and stuff. And I really enjoyed just building the UI and building these experiences. And there's a quick feedback loop of like you build something and you can see the changes right in front of you. And so I just kept going down that path. And became an Android engineer at Big Nerd Ranch is really where I got started, I would say.
That's really cool. I never quite got into modding, but I did play The Sims, and I would use the cheat codes on Sims like Motherload and
Oh
stuff
yeah.
to make a bunch of money. And I did feel really fancy when I found this. I guess it was a mod where like I could like make them not lose their stats throughout the day, but I never quite figured out how to make my own. But that's a super cool way to get into it. But I've definitely heard the same thing about the gaming industry being pretty tough.
Yeah, challenging place to be. But I find building mobile apps is pretty similar to building a game. A self-contained system with a UI, but it's a lot, I'd say, more forgiving to be building mobile apps for clients or for a product company than it is maybe to be building a video game, which is a very tough market.
I can see that. Yeah, especially since like everybody has a mobile device at this point, but not necessarily a gaming console.
Yeah, I mean, mobile apps are ubiquitous now. It's weird to think back just 10 years ago. Smartphones still felt new
Yeah.
to some degree. And now they're just everywhere, dominating our lives. We're looking at them for half the time of our existence.
Right.
How
It's
quickly it changed.
I know it's funny because like a lot of us didn't grow up with them, but then still they're just such a big part of our lives somehow. They've just consumed us.
Yeah. So it feels good that I can at least hack on, this thing that I'm looking at constantly and build the apps that I at least want to use.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. So, like, I have this question that's kind of like a terminology question that I've just been wondering about, like, at least from your perspective, because I'm sure a lot of people have different opinions. Like, what's the difference between software engineering and development?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So software engineering versus software development. I think what I usually differentiate is a software engineer from a software developer, and so maybe we can drive the other definition from that. Um, I feel like a developer works on a particular stack and achieves those results. And so maybe you have an Android developer, an iOS developer. It's very common that focus on a specific domain for Android and iOS, and they can drive results in that narrow domain. They are developing software in this specific field. I think a software engineer is a bit more broad. That's kind of the title that someone like Google or Facebook might use. And a software engineer focuses on broader problems. Maybe they're in the Android or iOS space, but they're focusing on more software engineering tasks, so like math and computation, data structures, algorithms. And so the problems they're solving are a lot more broad than any specific platform needs. And so that's, everyone could give you a different definition. That's kind of how I divvy it up, is that a software development is more about focused, achieving some very narrow result in a domain. And engineering is about solving the broader problems. And it's maybe more math oriented.
Okay. Yeah, I think that kind of makes sense. And it leads into my next question, which was like, so you've always you've considered yourself an Android developer. And so like what kind of skill set do you need to do
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, my title shifted around from Android developer to lead developer to Android engineer to software engineer to managers of various kinds. The role generally has stayed the same, even if maybe the semantics are a little different. To be a mobile developer, I think what you need foremost is the ability to learn rapidly, because the platforms are always changing. And so I know iOS and Android every year receive new updates, the APIs change, the permissions models change. I mean, so much is constantly in flux year over year at the whims of Google and Apple that as a mobile dev, you just have to be able to roll with the punches and learn quickly. And so I'd say, learning and adaptability are probably top priority. Um, two, you gotta like it. I mean, it's you better find some enjoyment from building user experiences, and working with product managers very closely, because they're going to be your partners. So partnering with product managers, designers, whoever your partner is on the other platform, iOS or Android. And so you better enjoy working in a team environment where you're collaborating and building something together.
Yeah, I can see that, and especially just being willing to learn because it definitely does change so much. I for like a few years, I mean, so I think this is a bit of a trend with people in the design field is it's pretty Apple heavy from what I can tell, at least from my peers that I know. And so when I was working at Stanley Black and Decker, we were doing a lot of mobile development, and I felt like all the designers were using like iPhones, and I had an iPhone. And so then I was like, okay, my next phone is going to be an Android. So I had an Android, but then like in the 3 years that I had an Android, so much about the Apple OS changed. And so then I was like, wait, now I'm behind on the Apple. And so it's just interesting. And I guess kind of that was like a roundabout way of me asking is do you have you found that to be kind of similar where like your designers
Yeah.
have Apple devices and then like do you feel like Android apps aren't designed as well because they don't know or
Yeah, so I would say that I agree about the designer and product manager point of view, which is I think iOS is more heavily represented there in usage and in senior leadership. I'll call that out as well. A lot of the VPs I've worked with, a lot of iOS users there. Um, and so the end result would be as an Android dev coming in, we'd often get iOS designs, and it's a very common request. And all the Android devs in your audience can probably agree that you'll be told to translate the designs. We'll provide just iOS designs and you can figure it out. And so the Android devs left to kind of fill in the gaps and translate over to our architecture and patterns. But on the flip side, I actually think that, in my opinion, Android's design system, material design, is better than the iOS system. I much prefer Android apps over iOS apps from a design perspective. I think it's a lot smoother. I think the transitions are better. I think material design has an edge.
I can see that. I really like the way material design is laid out when I like read through the guidelines. It's very nice. Yeah, I don't know. I've kind of I switched back to iPhone just to kind of see what I like, but I feel like I don't know. There's things that I liked about Android that iPhone doesn't have, and then it's vice versa. There's a few different things, but
Yeah, I've gone the other way. Now I'm trying to use an iOS device more just to get used to it and for
uh,
like, familiarize myself. I've used Android for so long, and so it's a bit of the other way for me.
yeah, it's interesting.
Nowadays, I just have both side by side, and I'm
Yeah,
constantly loading, two different code bases onto them and testing both.
yeah, I feel like you have to. Yeah. So is that like, yeah, I wanted to talk about like the decision you made to get into management, but like I guess one factor of that is are you since as a manager you're managing like both apps now or like both like operating systems at this point?
Yeah, it depends on the role. I've been a manager at 3 companies now, and each one is unique. And so currently I'm managing Android and iOS applications along with the backend system as well. And so we operate in team verticals at my current company. And so it's really about achieving results within that vertical focused on customer value. But in prior companies such as Pandora, I worked purely on the Android side of things. And so I was an Android engineering manager with only Android engineers reporting to me, and we focused on that domain. And so it really depends on the company for how they're going to divvy up responsibility to their engineering managers or software development managers.
Mm. Maybe that's why Pandora had such a good, this is like a side note, but like I have a Roku TV and I was comparing the Spotify and Pandora apps for the TV, and the Pandora one was so good. Maybe I don't know, maybe they had like a Roku team or something. And so they like knew what they were doing.
Yeah, no, I think about what I can say here. I think that the Pandora team for connected devices is really talented. And so I can speak highly of them. And I know they focus on that domain, focusing on Roku and other such similar devices. And they do a great job of making sure Pandora works everywhere.
Yeah, that's cool. I think that's important. I was like, because like they took advantage of certain affordances that made sense for the TV, I felt like. So like making it full screen and like having the album art moving. But anyway, that's a
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
a side note.
The mix of good engineers and good product managers that make
Yeah,
that kind
yeah.
of stuff happen.
That's great. But yeah, like just talking more about management in general, it's definitely a big decision point in many people's careers once they've reached a certain point. It's kind of like I'm getting asked by my manager at this point now, like, do you want to go the individual contributor route or the managerial route? So
Yeah.
what made you pick the managerial route? Or do you even feel like you've picked? Do you feel like you could go back to?
Yeah, I definitely feel like I could go back to being an engineer pretty easily. It might take a few months of readjusting, and maybe my title will have to be shifted downwards as I get used to being an engineer again and ramp back up. Um, I was talking to an old friend of mine recently. It's hard for me to judge time in this weird COVID world, but uh, he just went from a senior leadership role back to being an iOS engineer. And he mentioned that it was like a vacation. Like it was so much less pressure and stress on him. And like he could just go back to focusing on this one thing and excelling at it and focusing on engineering again. And that really resonated with me. This idea of like, if it doesn't work out, or if I don't like being a manager, I can always be an engineer again, because that's what got me into the field in the first place, and that's what I enjoy. But
Yeah.
to answer your question for like why be a manager, I was actually talking to one of my direct reports this morning about this topic, because he had this pressure placed on him, much like you did, that to advance means to become a manager, and that for him to keep growing in his career, he's got to become a manager. And I dissuaded him of that notion. It's my belief that these are totally different career paths. Like being an IC, whether you're a designer or an engineer, is radically different than being a manager. Just two completely different career ladders with different skill sets required, different expectations, and the overlap between them is pretty low. Like you need context to manage designers or to manage engineers. You need to understand their domain, but I don't think the expectation is that you will need to be an engineer or designer if you're also managing them. Like they should be separate skill sets and separate roles. And so to my direct report, I made it clear, you can become a manager, but if you do that, you should do it because you want to manage people. You enjoy the social interactions, you enjoy the coaching, you enjoy planning and structure, organization and team building, but not because I don't know, want more power or a bigger paycheck. It's not even true. You can definitely make just as much or more as an IC these days as a manager. And so like if you're getting into management for the wrong reasons, I think you're setting yourself up for complete misery, because all you're going to be dealing with is not the problems that you enjoyed for getting into this field in the first place, not design or not engineering. You're going to be dealing with sticky people and their people problems and how to help them through it. And so I just really hope people go into the field with the right mindset and set their expectations correctly.
Yeah. Well, maybe you can coach me for a bit here. So I kind of like the people interactions on like working with people and stuff, but I just feel like I see managers in so many meetings all the time, like team related meetings, like you have to be there for like planning out the like things like roadmaps and like all this HR stuff. And I guess I'm just wondering if like all that kind of stuff I don't think I would like balance out with, I guess, the nice, like I think the one-on-ones would be like, I think I'd really enjoy the coaching part of it at some point, but I'm just not sure about the other stuff.
Um, yeah. I mean, it depends. Each manager will run their team differently. There are parts of being a manager that are a lot of fun. Like I love my one-on-ones. I love getting to know people and building that trust with them and building the relationship. That's really fun to me. There are parts that are not fun. Performance discussions, especially the more serious kind. Performance reviews are always very long and it can be challenging. Anything related to really sticky topics that are painful, like pay or people going on leave. That can be challenging. But that's also part of the role, is that you have to help your team through hard times. If it's only the good times, then you're missing half the role. It's you just got to coach people through it. And so the problem space is more ambiguous. Like as an engineer or as a designer, we have these discrete problems, build a screen for this type of functionality, or design a logo, or write this code that performs this function with this acceptance criteria. It's very discrete. There's a right answer. With management, there's never really a right answer. It's like, go handle this person's emotions. It's like, well, there's a lot of wrong things you can do. That's definitely true. But there's probably not like a singular right way to manage people. And so you have to figure out what your style is and lean into it. Like what works for one manager might not work for another. And even among your direct reports, how you manage one direct report will likely differ compared to other direct reports, because what works for one might not work for the other. And so, I don't know. My point there is people are sticky, and you're gonna have to learn to adjust to manage different styles.
Yeah, I like that point about like finding your own style and also adjusting to how other people work too, as well. Because I feel like I have had managers in the past that I feel like are trying to adopt certain strategies of management. Maybe they've read somewhere, but then don't feel super genuine to them. But yeah, I can also recognize it's super hard to be a manager, and you might like talk to somebody and like you just not even be sure if you said the right something like the right thing, because you're like, well, I think that was good advice, but then did it actually resonate? I don't know.
Yeah, you find out your results way after the fact, and so it's like if you're judging a manager on their performance, like you're not going to know that week, but you'll know maybe 6 months from now when the team all quits.
Yeah.
Or maybe the team's really high performing and they did a good job. But it's hard to judge a manager performance like in the moment, because everything happens on a delay.
As a manager, how much do you, yeah, like just thinking about retention and stuff, like I feel like that's something I think managers often worry about. Is that true?
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah.
It, I mean, that's definitely top of mind. Hopefully, not something you have to worry about all the time, unless things are just on fire. But attrition and retention are critical for any healthy team. I guess to kind of underlie how I view what is a healthy team, it's the idea of psychological safety in that team. So this idea that you can trust each other, that you can fail without harsh repercussions, that you have this shared foundation of trust amongst the team members and between the manager and the team. If you have that psychological safety, then your team has the ability to be high performing. It doesn't mean necessarily you will be high performing. Like there's a lot of other things you can work on, like actual planning and making sure you have the domain expertise. But without psychological safety, your team is pretty much doomed to fail. Like you have to have it, because without it, you're not going to trust each other. Communication will be poor. Mistakes are punished severely, or attitude problems occur. And so for me, that's the kind of the baseline for any functioning team is like, do we trust each other? um, yeah, that's kind of my baseline philosophy for building a team. And so coming into any new org or any new team, it's like ascertaining where we're at in regards to trust and psychological safety is priority one.
Can definitely see that. And yeah, speaking of like going into different organizations, what is working at these different companies you've worked at taught you about because I feel like you worked at some big companies, some small companies, and what have you learned
Yeah.
about those? And like, what do you feel like you have a preference for a type of company at this point?
Yeah, I think I figured myself out after a lot of trial and error. I think some people would look at me and be like, "Wow, Matt is a job hopper," and that maybe is not the right label. But I definitely am not willing to be, um, compromising on my own happiness. Like if I find something that doesn't work, then I want to make a change. If I find a role that doesn't fit, then I'm going to make a change. And for me, that means I've worked in a lot of different companies. I've worked at small startups where I was the lead engineer for my platform. I've worked at agencies and consultancies. I've worked at large companies with millions of daily active users, and even companies larger than that. And so I've kind of seen the breadth of the industry to some degree. And for me, what I enjoy is somewhere in the middle. And so I really like companies with, I'll say like 500 to 1,000 people. It's a large company in all by all rights. But I think of Pandora or my current employer as well as examples of they're the right size, and they're the right size for me because I feel like I have the support I need around me. There are systems in place, there's processes, there's recruiting best practices or engineering best practices. Like they have some baseline of things figured out, which I appreciate. We're not starting from scratch. But there's still room to make an impact for me to come in with my own expertise and background and help drive initiatives that I think are valuable. And so it's this right mix of where we have some baseline foundation set up for who we are as a company and how we operate, but there's still room for me to come in and have an outsized impact. If the company is too small, then it feels like we have to do everything. And you kind of have that startup mentality of the world's on fire. You have limited time and funding. You got to just push and drive constantly, leading to either burnout of me or the team or both. And on the flip side, if your company's too big, there's the sense of, do I even matter? Like, why am I here? They could replace me. I'm a cog in a machine that has no real relevance to the grander importance of this company. And so I feel like I like someplace in the middle where I can find a home and drive impact in my team and drive impact for the company as a whole, while not having to build everything from scratch.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So my kind of last work related question, and this can also be, it's sort of almost a transition question because I want to talk about like life in general too, but like what's a day in the life like for you and how's it changed from what it was before the pandemic? And I know you kind of switched some roles as well, but just like generally
Yeah.
speaking.
Um, yeah, I think generally pre and post pandemic, it's pretty similar in that it is a lot of meetings. The reputation is true there from most managers. The nature of the meetings is different somewhat. Like they're not in person now, so that can feel a bit awkward at first. Pre-pandemic, I'd go into the office and meet with people and have actual one-on-ones in person, which I really enjoyed. And I usually mix it up. We'd go to Piedmont Park and have a walk, or we'd go grab a coffee. Like we'd go up and do something out and about, which really helps with like, building that relationship and building that trust. Uh, and now post-pandemic one-on-ones are a little bit more um, fabricated maybe, like you have to be very intentional about when you're socializing or when you're building trust with people, because like these happy accidents of running into people at the office don't happen anymore. And so if I'm going to build a relationship with somebody, I have to go out of my way to intentionally do it, or it probably won't happen at all, or to be very, very slow. And so one-on-ones, I have to make sure that we have them and that we take some time to actually get to know each other, because we don't have those casual conversations as much. And so that for me is kind of the hardest part of the pandemic in being a manager, is that so much of this role is about relationship building, whether with direct reports or my peers or my stakeholders like product managers and designers. It's all relationships, and it's harder to build relationships while full-time remote than it is in person. And so I don't have a magic solution for that, unfortunately, other than it takes intentional effort, and maybe even more meetings to help try to build some bridge to all these different people. Um, But to get back to your original question, like average day, yeah, there are a lot of meetings, one-on-ones, product spec meetings, scrum meetings, like sprint plannings or daily stand-ups. Every team and company runs them differently, but the common threads are always there. Like you're going to be meeting with your team, both as individuals and as a team unit regularly. You're going to be meeting with stakeholders like product managers and designers to figure out what we're building and how we're going to build it and how do we decompose these large epics into smaller tasks. You're going to be meeting with larger units like your department for Android or mobile or however it's split up, and figuring out what do we stand for in terms of best practices or code quality. And so a lot of these themes kind of run the same across companies. And so between the meetings, you actually get some, like work done in terms of, maybe you're writing reports on people's performance, or maybe you're keeping track of some interesting data around sprint velocity. There's no one that's going to ever tell you like what to do as an engineering manager. Maybe your manager if they're micromanaging you, but that hasn't really happened in my experience. Usually you're left on your own and you have to figure out, how do I fill this time in a way that's valuable? And so it's a bit different than being an individual contributor where you have someone over you that's like, how's your sprint task going? Like, how many points do you have? What's the progress? Give me that status update. As a manager, you're left just to your own devices, and you have to figure out how to fill your time in a way that's productive. So for me, I like to look at data. So I'll be in Jira all day. I love Jira and like pulling my reports and seeing, velocities and understanding where we're at and the status of things. That kind of data gathering, especially from a product standpoint as well, using like Mode or any other analytics tool, Crashlytics, Firebase, to figure out, what's the state of our project, state of our app, what are the big issues we're facing. That's often where I feel like I can drive the most value, is kind of like this investigative research to figure out what the team should be focusing on next. And so, all that is to say, what is the role? Relationship building and investigation.
That's cool. Yeah, like you're investigating your own team. It's like productivity.
Productivity,
Yeah.
or the product, to
Or the
see
product.
status of things. Are we crashing too high? Are we having slow load times? Is there a cold start issue? What's going on?
Yeah, and what you were talking about with like walking meetings before, this is like kind of random and personal, but I remember like when I was like going on like online dates and stuff, like and like meeting people for the first time, I always hated like just like sitting at a coffee date. Like I always liked it like if we just went and walked around somewhere. And so then I started thinking about, yeah, like the one-on-ones where I'm sitting in an office with my manager, I'm like, they just feel so formal. But I feel like, yeah, anytime I've walked with like a leader or a manager, it just feels like, okay, like you're doing something together and you can like, I don't know, it's somehow it's just like that sitting, it seems more stilted. Like I guess when you're doing something, it
Yeah.
feels like easier to connect somehow.
And when you're sitting, it's usually like opposite sides of a table. Like you're staring at each other, but you're literally on opposite sides. In one of the old companies I worked for, there was one side of the table that could see outside the room. And so like whoever got there first would grab that table and they could actually see outside the room. But the other person was just stuck there, like staring at you with just a white wall as the background. It's these very jarring environments. And you feel very much kind of claustrophobic and stuck in this small room with someone. Those were some of like the worst one-on-ones, when you're just kind of oppositionally on this table. And so, yeah, that convinced me to start getting out and making it something else. Like go for a walk or make it a little bit more dynamic, and walking next to each other rather than
Yeah, you're
staring at
equal.
each other across the table.
Yeah, just like the dynamics of just how you're set up makes a huge difference. And yeah, I've been in places like that too, where you're like in a fishbowl and everyone can see you, but then you can't see anybody else, and like they somehow think that's more productive.
I mean, different strategies for different people, but
Uh-huh.
I like to just feel a little more natural.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this has been super interesting, but I want to like make sure we save a little time just to talk about life in general. And so, yeah, so like what do you do outside of work to decompress?
Oh, okay. Lately, I'm actually at my 1 month anniversary of this activity. I picked up kickboxing. And so I'm trying to stick with it. It is really hard, but I've been doing it for a month now, a couple times a week. And so that's been a great kind of de-stressor, like punching bags, literally, and getting the gloves on, hand wraps, and all that. A lot of kicks, but that's been a great way to de-stress, and get a little exercise in. So I've been enjoying that. Um, Beyond that, I play a lot of games. Play some League of Legends, play some chess online. Like I like online competitive games, but those don't. I think those make me more stressed.
Yeah.
So I'll circle back to going for walks and exercise, hanging out with my wife.
It's a good balance. Yeah, I actually just recently started playing chess online, like on chess.com, and
Yeah,
I'm definitely a noob, not that great, but maybe we should play.
yeah, no, I love it.
That'll be fun.
I'm a ranked chess player,
Ooh.
not ranked very highly anymore or ever. Uh, but I always love helping people learn, and yeah, I usually play on live chess, which is a great free site for chess online. Give it
Cool.
a little plug there.
Nice. Cool, cool. So, if I'm remembering this correctly, I think we talked about this at one point a long time ago, but did you also grow up in in small town Georgia?
Yeah, I don't know
Yeah.
if they call it small town these days. Maybe 30 years ago, it was kind of small, Buford, Georgia.
Mhm.
Then they built the Mall of Georgia,
Oh,
like
yeah,
5 minutes
not
away
so
from
small.
where I live.
Mall
So
of
now it's
Georgia.
not small. But when my family moved out there, it was like dirt roads. Yeah, it was kind of middle of nowhere. And then the world built up around us. And so, yeah, it's Gwinnett County. I went to Mill Creek High School, which is a new high school over in that area, but kind of in the North Gwinnett region. And so, yeah, I don't know if it can be counted as a small town these days. I guess it's one of the most populous counties in the state. But little old Buford definitely felt small when I was really young.
Yeah, it's interesting how like your maybe where you grew up felt small, but then when you go back, you're like, oh, it's not actually that small. Because I grew up in like a smallish place outside of Savannah, but then like a lot of people live and work in Savannah, and so then that's where a lot of people lived and commuted there. But how do you feel like living in kind of semi-rural Georgia, like kind of shaped the way you live your life?
Um, hmm, Tough to say. That's a good question. I definitely was more insulated. Um, I think until I came to college. Like moving to Atlanta definitely broadened my horizons. Like I met a lot of different people. Like coming to Georgia Tech and just meeting my classmates and making new friends. It definitely made me see a side of the world I hadn't seen before. And just living in the city and the hustle and bustle and like actually being in a place where you could walk places, like it was just kind of a different way of living. And so now I look back at like uh, my life, like in high school and before. It's like you're living in the suburbs. You don't really go anywhere except by car. And if you did, it would take you a long time. Like it's just a very different existence. And it's a lot quieter. It's like I don't know. As I get older, I'm like maybe it'd be nice to have quiet. That sounds kind of great. Um, but I don't know. I'm at a point now where I prefer living in the city. So I'm kind of over near the Decatur area. Like everything's really walkable. I can go to public transport. Anything I really want to experience is kind of within reach just by going out into our local neighborhood. Um, so I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah,
I think it's
no.
kind of the idea of it was a very different way of living than what I'm experiencing now. And like neither one's necessarily better than the other, but they're just different. And so I guess since I grew up in a very suburb style of life, now I'm more attracted to the other style of being in the city.
I can definitely relate to that. Especially like, yeah, with the whole thing where you have to drive pretty much everywhere. That's exactly like where I'm from. And I loved when I was in Atlanta, just being able to like walk anywhere and having that transportation and like walking to school, walking to work. It was great. But yeah, another thing that we kind of have in common is that we both married someone from Europe.
Yeah.
And I know like I've had some of these experiences, but like what are just some of the cultural differences you've had to navigate?
Yeah, my wife is Swiss. Her father's Swiss, her mother's Guatemalan. But she spent her teenage years in Switzerland. Um, they lived in Atlanta maybe 10 years ago, and then she stayed for school, and then slowly over the past decade got acclimated to the US. And then a little while after she and I started dating, she became a US citizen. Then we got married. Um, it definitely, yeah, talk about like broadening horizons. It definitely helped me expand my understanding of the world. Like I grew up in a very, I don't know, US centric mindset. Yeah, I never really thought much outside of the US. And I only traveled outside the US, I guess maybe twice before meeting her. And now it's been many times to a lot of different places. But she definitely helped broaden my understanding of what it meant to how other cultures live. Because I guess I grew up thinking like the way the US does things is normal and great, and that there's no reason to ever look at any other way of doing things. Um, which maybe is okay for things like food, but maybe less great for things like healthcare. And so I look around now and I start questioning things more that I'm with her. I'm like, why are we doing things this way? Like, why does our election system work this way? Why this? And I start looking around and seeing that, not everywhere does things the same way as us, which I guess sounds like such a truth and obvious to so many people. But for me, it was kind of this revelation of like, wow, the way we do things isn't necessarily right. There are other ways of operating and living and ways of existing that are just so radically different and foreign to me that it can be difficult to even understand them. And so she really opened my eyes to just what it could mean to not be in the US.
Yeah, I mean, I just think having conversations with people where you hear their backgrounds and like and then they hear yours. And I think it's just so important for people to be heard and just getting that exposure to different cultures is super important. I know with my husband, I have to like or he asks me to, because at first I was like, oh, I don't want to, but I definitely like help him with like certain like phrases that like he might be translating literally from Serbian to English. And so I'm
Yeah.
like, well, actually, we don't quite say it like this in English. And then there's just like some things with the humor that's a little different that I noticed. And then like, I'm like, are you making fun of me? And it was actually like endearment, like he'll like likes to imitate me. And for me, like, I guess for my background, I'm like, I feel like you're making fun of me. But he's like, that's actually a sign of love, is like copying you or imitating you. And I'm like, oh, really? I feel like you're making fun of me, but okay.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. And now at this point, I like, if he stopped doing it, then I'd be like, well, maybe that's actually a bad sign.
Yeah, I think looking at Swiss culture, they're very big into talking politics at the dinner table, which like starting out for me, I was like, wow, like these are topics that we never really touched on in my family over the dinner table. Like we wouldn't really talk about, presidential elections or healthcare policy. Like, it's just we wouldn't really talk about politics or religion. And going to like a European dinner and sitting down with her family and their friends and it's just like the common conversation. It's like, what else would you talk about? Of course you talk politics. What else is there? Everything's politics. And so for them, it's just this different mindset. And I had to get used to it and get really used to chatting about the subject.
Yeah, I mean, they'll want to know your opinion and you have to have one.
Yeah. Yeah, I got grilled pretty hard about Donald Trump. They all
Oh,
know about that.
that's a tough
I'm like,
one.
I'm not the envoy of America, y'all. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. I am the voice of my country. No, no. Too much pressure. Yeah. Well, I guess the like last topic I want to talk about, if you're down to talk about it, is you're super close to becoming a dad, and that's so
yeah,
exciting, but also just like I'm sure like terrifying. So like what's going through your mind?
I think you summed it up pretty well. Yeah, it's exciting, it's nerve-wracking, terrifying, probably accurate. Today we built the stroller, and so one more kind of milestone for us. So I still got to install the car seat, Um, but otherwise, I think we're pretty much ready. I know Anik is very ready. She is done with being pregnant. She wants it to be over, but the baby will come when it's ready. And at this point, it's just any day now, any day.
That's really exciting. I really hope she does not have to go with what my mother went through for both of me and my brother, or like it was a 10-month thing. That was like, apparently that
Wow.
runs in my family. And I hope, I'm like, oh gosh, that's a long time, but the baby comes out when they want to come out, I
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we'll see.
guess.
Yeah, we're ready at this point. I think we're excited, and I'll get some parental leave off thanks to my amazing employer, and so I'm ready and waiting and excited and nervous, and it's just a whole flood of emotions. And
Yeah,
I keep asking all the parents in my life, my peers or Rex or just coworkers, like for advice, and they all kind of hinge the same, which is like nothing will prepare you. Like you are unprepared, and that's okay, and just go with the flow. You'll figure it out. Um, I think that's pretty much been the underlying thread through all the advice I've been given.
I think that's good life advice in general.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that seems like good advice for pretty much any situation. But yeah, for
Yeah,
parenting, you're like, there's no advice we can give. It's like you'll figure it out.
you will figure it out. Well, thank you so much, Matt, for coming on my show. This has been a really great conversation. And yeah, it was really great talking with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rachel.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss a single show. Interested in being on the show? Know someone that might be a good fit? Use the nomination form in the description.